Instructor claimed, "No weapon can touch it." The human cadet loaded one anyway. Part 1, the demonstration. The transport ship dropped out of hyperspace above 4, and Myra pressed her face against the viewport like a child seeing snow for the first time. The desert moon hung below them, its surface a patchwork of orange sand and dark rock formations. Twin suns painted long shadows across the dunes. Somewhere down there, the Galactic Defense Academy had built their most advanced training facility. Somewhere down there, her future waited. "First time seeing a binary system?" asked her bunkmate. The alien stood nearly 7 feet tall, with skin like polished copper and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. His people had been traveling between stars for 10,000 years before humans learned to make fire. "We only have one sun on Earth," Myra said, "just one." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your species is very young. You will learn." Myra did not argue. She had learned not to argue. Humans had joined the Galactic Assembly only 43 years ago, and in that time they had earned a reputation for being loud, curious, and slightly mad. They asked too many questions. They took too many risks. They did not know their place in the order of things. The other species tolerated them the way one might tolerate an excited puppy, with patience, amusement, and the occasional firm word. The training facility rose from the desert floor like a metal flower. Landing pads surrounded it, along with firing ranges, obstacle courses, and something that looked like a gladiatorial arena from ancient Rome. Cadets from a dozen species marched in formation across the sand, their uniforms bright against the orange landscape. Myra spotted engineers with their 6 arms, soldiers with shells thick enough to stop a bullet, and slim Etherians who seemed to float rather than walk. She was the only human in her class. She had known this before she applied. It did not matter. She had worked harder than anyone else to get here, and she would work harder than anyone else to stay. The first week passed in a blur of physical training, weapons instruction, and tactical simulations. Myra was not the strongest cadet, nor the fastest, nor the most skilled with a plasma rifle. She came in last in 3 different exercises and had to repeat 2 of them. But she watched everything. She listened to every lecture. And at night, while the other cadets slept, she filled her notebook with observations, questions, and diagrams. "What are you always writing?" asked one evening. He had taken to sitting with her at meals, perhaps out of pity, perhaps out of genuine curiosity. Valued knowledge above all else, and Myra's constant note-taking seemed to intrigue him. "Everything," she said. "I write down everything I see, everything I learn. It helps me remember." "Your species has poor memory." "No, we just believe that writing things down makes us think about them more carefully. When you have to put something into words, you have to understand it first." Considered this, that is, not unintelligent. High praise from a. The announcement came on the morning of the 8th day. All cadets were to report to Arena 3 for a special demonstration. Instructor would be teaching a lesson about the enemy. Myra had heard of, everyone had. He was a member of the oldest warrior species in the known galaxy. His scales shimmered with colors that changed depending on his mood, green for calm, red for anger, blue for deep thought. He had fought in 17 major conflicts across 4 different star systems. He had killed more enemies than most soldiers would ever see. And he had lost his left arm to a void crawler 3 decades ago. The prosthetic replacement was made of black metal and moved with perfect smoothness. "Today," said, his voice carrying across the arena without any amplification, "you will learn about death." The cadets stood in perfect rows. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The Silence Collective has been our enemy for 2 centuries. They do not negotiate. They do not retreat. They do not show mercy. Their goal is simple, the extinction of all organic life in the galaxy. He paused to let this sink in. They have many weapons, ships that can destroy planets, viruses that can kill a population in hours, soldiers bred for nothing but war, but their most terrible weapon is this. He pressed a button on his wrist device. The containment field in the center of the arena hummed to life, and something materialized within it. Myra felt her stomach drop. The void crawler was roughly the size of a large horse, but that was where any comparison to normal life ended. Its body was a nightmare of black metal and organic tissue, with legs that bent in wrong directions and a head that seemed to have too many eyes. Its carapace, its outer shell, gleamed like oil in the arena's lights. It was motionless, dormant, but even in sleep it radiated wrongness. Looking at it made Myra's eyes hurt. "This is a void crawler," said. "The Collective's most effective ground weapon. It was captured during the Battle of Nexus Prime at the cost of 342 lives. It is the only one ever taken alive." He walked closer to the containment field, and his scales shifted to a deep blue. "The void crawler's carapace is made of adaptive armor. This means it can change its structure to resist any attack. Watch." He lowered the containment field. The crawler stirred, raising its head. Its many eyes focused on the cadets, and several of them stepped backward. Myra forced herself to stay still. Picked up a standard plasma rifle from a weapons rack. "Plasma dispersal," he fired. The bolt of superheated gas struck the crawler's side and splashed away like water on hot metal. The creature did not even flinch. "Kinetic impact." He switched to a. The hypersonic slug hit the crawler with enough force to punch through a starship hull. It bounced off, flattened into a disk of twisted metal. "Directed energy." A laser beam, bright enough to blind anyone looking directly at it. The beam scattered across the crawler's surface like light through a prism. "Nothing works," said. "The carapace analyzes incoming attacks in microseconds. It calculates trajectory, energy type, impact force. Then it restructures its molecular composition to counter that specific threat. By the time your second shot arrives, the armor has already adapted. You cannot hurt it. You cannot damage it. You cannot kill it." He raised the containment field again. The crawler settled back into dormancy. "This demonstration exists to teach you one thing. When you face a void crawler, you run. You do not fight. You do not stand your ground. You retreat, you call for orbital support, and you pray that the bombers arrive before the crawler reaches you. Any questions?" Silence. "Good. Tomorrow you will each attempt to engage this creature with a weapon of your choosing. You will all fail, but perhaps in failing, you will learn something about humility." The cadets filed out of the arena. Myra was the last to leave. She stood at the edge of the viewing platform, staring at the dormant crawler, her notebook open in her hands. She was not writing words. She was drawing diagrams, the joints where the legs met the body, the segments of the carapace, the gaps between the armored plates. Human's voice made her jump. He had approached without making a sound. "What are you doing?" "Studying, Instructor." "Studying what? I told you no weapon can touch it." Myra looked at her diagrams, then back at the crawler. "You told us no weapon has touched it. That's not quite the same thing." Scales flickered orange, an emotion Myra could not identify. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the monster. Part 2: The Loading. That night Myra could not sleep. She lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling, running calculations in her head. The other cadets had accepted its lesson at face value. The crawler was invincible. There was nothing to be done except run and call for backup. This was the wisdom of 10,000 years of galactic warfare, distilled into a simple truth. But Myra was human, and humans were very young. They had not learned to accept simple truths. She reviewed what she knew. The adaptive armor worked by analyzing incoming threats. It read electromagnetic signatures, calculated velocities, measured energy wavelengths. It processed this information faster than any organic brain could think, and it responded by restructuring its molecular bonds to counter the specific type of attack. The key word was analyzed. The armor could only adapt to threats it understood. It could only counter attacks it recognized. The Silence Collective had engineered it to survive the weapons of the future: plasma, lasers, antimatter, everything that advanced civilizations used to wage war. But what about the weapons of the past? Myra sat up in her bunk. Her heart was beating faster now. She pulled out her notebook and began to write furiously, filling page after page with calculations and diagrams. The idea was crazy. It was so crazy that no one would have thought of it, because no one in the galaxy still used weapons from before the age of space travel. No one except humans. She waited until the base's lights dimmed to their nighttime setting. Then she slipped out of her bunk and made her way through the corridors, moving quietly. The Academy's security was designed to keep threats out, not to stop cadets from wandering. Still, she was careful. The auxiliary armory was located beneath the main building, 3 levels down. It held weapons deemed too old, too primitive, or too culturally significant to be disposed of. Most species had donated items for the collection: ceremonial swords, ancient projectile weapons, even a war hammer that weighed more than Myra did. These items were kept as historical curiosities, reminders of how far galactic civilization had come. Myra's access code, like all cadet codes, worked on the auxiliary armory door. The room beyond was dusty and quiet, lit only by the soft glow of emergency lights. She walked past cases of antique weapons until she found what she was looking for. The crossbow sat in a glass case labeled Earth Pre-Industrial Period Hunting Implement. It was a simple device, made of wood and metal and string. No electronics, no power cells, no targeting computer. It had been donated by the human delegation as an example of their species' history, a reminder of the long road they had traveled from caves to starships. Myra broke the case open. The alarm that should have sounded did not. She had spent the previous hour studying the armory's security systems and finding their weaknesses. She lifted the crossbow, feeling its weight. It was lighter than she expected. The string was still taut, preserved by whatever processes the Academy used to maintain its collection. She found bolts in a drawer beneath the case. Old ones made of wood and iron. They would not work for what she had in mind. She needed something different. She took the crossbow back to her quarters. The fabrication tools she had requisitioned for a personal project sat on her desk. She worked through the night, stopping only to drink water and stretch her cramped fingers. By the time the first sun began to rise over the horizon, she had what she needed. The bolt was a work of careful engineering. Its shaft was made of compressed carbon fiber, light and strong. Its tip was made of a material used in windows and decorative panels, completely inert, with no electromagnetic signature whatsoever. It would not conduct electricity. It would not absorb or emit radiation. It would not show up on any standard sensor sweep. To the Void Crawler's adaptive armor, it would look like nothing at all. "What are you doing?" Myra jumped, stood in the doorway of their shared quarters, his copper skin reflecting the early morning light. His eyes were fixed on the crossbow. "I could not sleep," she said. "That is not an answer." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "You stole a weapon from the historical collection. You have spent the night making. What is that? A projectile." "It's a bolt for the crossbow. For the demonstration today." His voice was flat. "You are going to try to kill the Void Crawler with a primitive weapon." "I'm going to try to hit it. Killing it would be a bonus." Sat down heavily on his bunk. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he asked why. Myra set down the bolt and turned to face him. "The adaptive armor works by predicting threats. It reads energy signatures, calculates trajectories, analyzes attack patterns. It's designed to counter advanced weapons, plasma, kinetic, directed energy, everything modern." "Yes," Instructor explained this. "But a crossbow bolt doesn't have an energy signature. It's just a piece of material moving through the air, slowly by combat standards, silently, with nothing for the sensors to detect." She picked up the bolt again, holding it up so the light caught the tip. The collective engineered the crawler to survive the future. They never considered the past. Stared at the bolt. His eyes reflected its shape, and for a moment he was silent. "This is insane," he said finally. "I know. The crossbow has no power, no targeting assistance, no way to calculate wind speed or distance. You will have to aim it yourself with your own eyes, using nothing but instinct." "I know. If you miss, you will have embarrassed yourself in front of the entire cadet corps. If you are wrong about the armor, the crawler might break containment and kill you. Either way, you will probably be expelled from the academy." "I know." Stood up, he walked to her desk and looked down at the crossbow, at the bolt, at the pages of calculations scattered across the surface. Then he looked at Myra. "Your species truly is mad," he said. "I know," Myra said, and she smiled. It was not a confident smile. It was the smile of someone who has made a choice and knows there is no turning back. "But I'm going to load it anyway." She fitted the bolt into the crossbow. The mechanism clicked into place with a satisfying sound. For a moment she just held it, feeling the weight of history in her hands. Her ancestors had used weapons like this to hunt, to fight, to survive. They had carried them through dark forests and across frozen plains. They had used them before they understood physics, before they had a word for velocity or trajectory. They had used them when they had nothing else. "I will not stop you," said quietly. "But I will not watch you die either. If this goes wrong, I am going to leave the arena before it ends." "Fair enough." "And if it goes right?" Myra looked up at him. "If it goes right," she said, "then maybe the galaxy will learn something about humans today." The second sun was rising now, painting the room in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere outside, a horn sounded, the call to morning assembly. In a few hours, the demonstration would begin. In a few hours, Myra would either prove her theory or become a cautionary tale. She did not pray. She did not believe in gods or fate or destiny. She believed in observation, calculation, and the stubborn refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. She believed in being human. She picked up the crossbow and walked out to meet her future. Part 3: The Shot. The arena was full. Every cadet in the academy had come to watch the demonstration. They stood in rows on the viewing platforms, their eyes fixed on the containment field at the center of the sand floor. The void crawler waited within, motionless, its black carapace gleaming under the harsh lights. Instructor stood beside the weapons rack, his scales shifting through shades of blue and green. "Today," he said, "you will each attempt to damage the void crawler. You will use any weapon from this rack. You will all fail. This is not a test of skill. It is a lesson in humility." One by one, the cadets stepped forward. An engineer tried a modified plasma cutter. The beam bent around the crawler's shell like water around a stone. A warrior brought her heaviest hammer down on the creature's back. The impact did not even leave a mark. An Etherian fired a neural disruptor, a weapon designed to disable organic nervous systems. The crawler's eyes tracked the beam, and nothing else happened. Myra called, "You are next." Myra walked to the weapons rack. She could feel the eyes of every cadet on her back. Some were curious, some were amused, one or two might have been sympathetic. She ignored them all. She did not take a weapon from the rack. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out the crossbow. The laughter started immediately. It rippled through the crowd like a wave, cadets from a dozen species pointing at the primitive device in her hands. Myra had expected this. She did not react. She simply stood there holding the crossbow, waiting for the noise to die down. Stared at her. His scales had shifted to a color she did not recognize, somewhere between orange and red, a mixture of emotions too complex to read. "Cadet," he said slowly, "what is that?" "A crossbow, Instructor. It's a weapon from Earth's pre-industrial period." "I know what it is. I am asking why you brought it here." Because I intend to use it, Instructor. The laughter grew louder. Someone shouted something in a language Myra did not understand, but the tone was clear enough. She was a joke, a foolish human who did not know her place, an arrogant child playing with toys while the adults handled real weapons. Raised a hand, the arena fell silent. That weapon, he said, belongs in a museum. It has no power source, no targeting system, no way to penetrate adaptive armor. It is an insult to modern warfare and an insult to this exercise. Stand down, Cadet. With respect, Instructor, you said we could choose any weapon. I meant any real weapon. This is a real weapon. Myra's voice was calm, steady. She had practiced this moment in her head 100 times. My ancestors used it to hunt. They used it to fight. They used it to survive for thousands of years before we learned to split atoms or travel between stars. It is the oldest weapon I know of that can still kill. Scales shifted again. For a long moment he did not speak. Then he stepped back from the containment field. Very well, Cadet, make your attempt. But when you fail, and you will fail, I expect you to learn something from the experience. Myra nodded. She walked to the firing line. The crawler stirred within its field, sensing movement. Its many eyes focused on her, dark and cold and ancient. She raised the crossbow. The bolt sat in its groove, the tip catching the light. She had studied the crawler's anatomy for hours, memorizing the locations of every joint and gap in its armor. There was one spot, a narrow seam where the left foreleg met the body, that led directly to what the captured research files called the neural cluster. The creature's brain, or the closest thing it had to one. It was a small target, maybe 2 inches across, at 30 meters, with a weapon she had never fired before, aiming only with her own eyes. Impossible. Myra breathed out. She thought of her ancestors, of hunters standing in dark forests, of soldiers facing armored knights, of survivors who had nothing but their hands and their minds and their refusal to give up. They had faced impossible odds before. They had faced them and won. That was what it meant to be human. She squeezed the trigger. The bolt flew. It made no sound. It carried no energy signature. It was just a piece of carbon and glass, moving through the air at a speed that would have been considered slow by any modern standard. The crawler did not react. Its adaptive armor did not shift. Its sensors did not register a threat. To the most advanced killing machine in the galaxy, the bolt was invisible, a piece of debris, a floating particle, nothing worth defending against. The tip punched through the gap in the armor. It slid between the plates, through the organic tissue beneath, and buried itself in the neural cluster. The void crawler shuddered. Its legs spasmed, scraping against the sand. Its eyes flickered, then went dark. And then slowly it collapsed, falling to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Every cadet in the arena stared at the fallen creature, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Instructor was the first to move. He walked slowly toward the crawler, his scales shifting through colors that Myra had never seen before. Purple, gold, silver, emotions too complex for any translator to interpret. He knelt beside the creature and examined the bolt protruding from its body. Then he looked up at Myra. "How," he said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "How did you know?" Myra lowered the crossbow. Her hands were shaking now, trembling with the release of tension she hadn't known she was holding. "The armor adapts to threats," she said, "but it can only adapt to threats it recognizes. No energy signature, no velocity calculation, no electromagnetic profile. To the crawler, my bolt was invisible." "But how did you think of it?" "No one has ever thought of it. In 2 centuries of war, no one has ever considered using primitive weapons against adaptive armor." Myra thought about her answer. She thought about the long history of her species, the wars they had fought, the enemies they had faced, the countless times they had been outmatched and still found a way to survive. She thought about the hunters in the forests, the soldiers in the trenches, the scientists and engineers who had built weapons out of nothing but ingenuity and desperation. "Because humans are young," she said finally. "We haven't forgotten where we came from. We remember when we had nothing but sticks and stones. We remember when every predator was bigger and faster and stronger than us." She looked at the fallen crawler, at the bolt that had killed it. Evolution doesn't prepare you for what came before. The collective built something perfect for surviving the future of warfare. They never considered the past. His scales had settled into a deep, thoughtful blue. "You understand," he said slowly, "that everything changes now. Your species has been tolerated but not respected. You have been seen as children playing at war. But this," he gestured at the crawler, "this changes everything. I know. The collective will learn of this. They will adapt. And will adapt faster," Myra smiled. It was a small smile, tired but genuine. "That's what we do, that's what we've always done." Regarded her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Perhaps," he said, "there is something to be learned from the young after all." He turned to face the assembled cadets. "This demonstration is over," he announced. "What you have witnessed today is classified. You will not speak of it outside this arena. Cadet, report to the Commandant's office immediately." Myra nodded and began to walk toward the exit. As she passed through the crowd, she felt hands touching her shoulders. Etherian, a dozen species reaching out to acknowledge what she had done. Some were congratulations. Some were simple gestures of respect. And some, she knew, were the first stirrings of something that might eventually become fear. Humans had just proven that they could kill the unkillable. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again. Was waiting for her at the arena's edge. His copper face was unreadable, but his voice was soft. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "I got lucky." "No," he shook his head. "Luck is when you succeed without preparation. You spent all night studying, calculating, preparing. That was not luck. That was human." Myra laughed, a short, surprised sound. "Is that a compliment?" "It is an observation," said, but there was something like warmth in his voice. "Come. The Commandant is waiting, and I suspect your life is about to become very complicated." He was right. Within a standard year, human regression warfare tacticians had become the most requested specialists across 12 allied systems. Military academies began teaching courses on primitive weapons and their applications against adaptive technologies. Research teams studied ancient Earth history, looking for other forgotten tools that might be repurposed for modern combat. And somewhere in the Academy's archives, Myra's crossbow received a new designation. It was no longer classified as a cultural curiosity or a historical artifact. It was now registered as the first weapon ever logged to kill a void crawler, complete with a full technical analysis and a recommendation for further study. Myra went on to graduate at the top of her class. She was offered positions in a dozen different military organizations, but she turned them all down. Instead, she returned to Earth and established the first academy for ancestral warfare, a school dedicated to teaching the old ways to a new generation of soldiers. Her students learned to use swords and spears, bows and crossbows, slings and throwing knives. They learned to fight without technology, to think without computers, to survive without the tools that modern civilization took for granted. And they learned the lesson that Myra had discovered on the sands of Four, that the future was not always the answer. Sometimes the past was waiting to be remembered. Sometimes all you needed was a sharp point and a steady hand. Sometimes being primitive was exactly what the universe needed. The end.